I've been at Cornell for 15 years teaching about sustainability and design in the built environment. And unlike many of my colleagues, I pride myself as being a maker as well as a thinker. I like to be involved and hands-on, and like most of you here, I'm trying to find a way to make a positive difference. Next. So I'm doing that rather than through the business model. I'm trying to make a difference by changing people's minds. And so I found myself at Cornell University, and it's a very interesting institution. It was founded about 150 years ago. It's located in upstate New York. I've lost my animation features, but the blue dots represent our peer institutions, the Ivy League schools, and you can see where we are. We're in the hinterland. We're in the middle of the Northeast, away from the large cities. We're often called centrally isolated, which is good in some ways. It allows us to remove ourselves from the distractions of the cities, and students can do a better job at their studies. And it also allows us, if we need the city fix, we can get it. But that unique situation allows us also to be in a closer contact with natural processes that surround us. Next. So we're on in the Finger Lakes region at the south end of Cayuga Lake. It was established in 1864 by Ezra Cornell, who was a local entrepreneur who wanted to found an institution where anyone could learn anything, pretty much. It was a unique institution in its founding because not only was it a privately endowed institution, but it became the land-grant institute for the state of New York, which means it has part of its core mission a mandate to act as a bridge between the research that's conducted at Cornell and the needs and wants of the stakeholders of the citizens of New York. And that's done through a Cornell Cooperative Extension offices located in every county in the state. So there is this tradition of caring about the welfare of others. Next. Of the so that founding was part of the Merrill Act, 1864, and so the university is part private and part public. And I actually belong to the public side, the statutory side. This is my college building, Martha Van Rensselaer, Human Ecology, and I'm in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis. And one of the things I do is teach a new class when I first came called Eco-Literacy and Design. The chair wanted to produce some curriculum that all design students had to take to learn about the challenges that face them as designers. So I based the course title on David Orr's book, Ecological Literacy, and I numbered the course 422 because that's today. And this quote is actually from the book, and you can read it yourself. It talks about deforestation, but it's the bottom sentence that I'd like to draw your attention to. We have a decade or two in which we must take unprecedented changes in the way we relate to each other and to nature. This was written in 1992. 2 decades have since passed. So I asked myself, have we taken unprecedented changes in the way we relate to each other and to nature? I would say maybe yes, we've made things worse than we did when this was originally written. So next. So what's happened? Well, let's look at it through the perspective of trees. So I have here habitat loss and gain. Well, the human species has done quite well in terms of habitat gain, but it's often at the expense of non-humans, and so there's a habitat loss. In order to support this unprecedented success reproductively, we have to provide for food and clothing and accommodations for these new numbers, and so this means turning so-called unproductive land into productive land. This means loss of non-person habitat. Next. And it also typically means the creation of landscapes of monocultural development, loss of biodiversity, in order to more efficiently produce the things that we all need and supposedly and want. Now, when you remove these trees from arid regions, it results quite often in a kind of desertification, usually attributed to wind erosion. Next, if you remove trees in moister regions of the world, you also get soil loss, but in this case, it's through water erosion. In both cases, you're losing soil, and as a result, you lose the ability to sustain life. Accompanying deforestation is a problem of groundwater loss, because what often happens without living trees on the landscape to take up the water as it falls on the surface and allowing for penetration into the aquifers, it runs off. Next. As we see here, this is a kind of deforestation in a sense. It happens with a forest fire, and the surface actually becomes hydrophilic. And so not only do you get soil runoff, but you get the loss of the replenishment of the aquifers. Next. Now, even forests that haven't been devastated are still under attack. In this case, this is one of the forests in the gorge at Cornell, and everything that you see that's green is actually an invasive species. We have honeysuckle and Norway maple taking over from the native flora and fauna. And finally, we have the issue of global climate change and greenhouse gases and carbon, which has risen to the fore as one of the most important environmental challenges that we face. And so, it's appropriate that be considered, although many of these challenges that I pointed out earlier are all interrelated. And probably the most important reason that we're facing these challenges isn't something that I've addressed directly, but it is the numbers of us and our increasing appetites. So, what can I do as a designer, and what can my students do as a designer to respond to this changing planet that we're living on? Well, a group of architects under the leadership of Ed Mazra came up with this 2030 challenge, because some research has shown that 50% of the world's energy and resources are devoted towards the creation, operation, and or decommissioning of the built environment. So that's a major chunk of the pie. Now, we've seen some charts here and elsewhere where we see what components of what sectors are responsible for what emissions. But in this case, it places designers in the forefront of people who can actually make a difference. Next. So this is what they're proposing for the U.S., that if the building sector is responsible for 50% of the carbon emissions, then maybe if we change the way we build, we can actually be responsible for bringing our CO2 levels down by 2030 to the Kyoto Protocol levels, and by 2050, reach a zone of carbon neutrality. The only problem with their proposal is that it's based on making a whole slew of new buildings to accommodate the growing populations and to refurbish those that need refurbishing and replace those that are typically replaced. The average building in the U.S. has a lifespan of 40 years, and so that's a lot of building. And most of the emphasis has in the architectural world has been placed on operational efficiencies. Those are the colored straight lines on the right side of the graph from low to high. But it turns out that the embodied energy, the amount of energy that goes into the materials of the building, are probably just as important, if not more important. You can see the embodied energy is the energy involved with the extraction, processing, delivery, and installation of any material that a building requires, from concrete to steel to glass. And you see it's more or less constant over time. It increases a bit due to maintenance, but it takes at minimum 25 years before it crosses the line of the operational efficiency. So by actually reducing the amount of embodied energy in buildings is how we're going to probably make some of the most significant and early impacts on the CO2 emissions. Now, this chart shows you the typical emission levels, or embodied energy, and that means CO2 footprints of these different materials. And you notice the metals are at the top, cementitious are at the bottom, and woods in the middle. Next. But if you look at the actual amount of material used in a building, you'll find that the cementitious material, even though they had low values, are very high in terms of the overall totals. And of all those materials, only one is renewable. All the rest are scarce, non-renewable resource. And if we're going to have to build for a planet that may reach 9 billion by 2050, that's a lot of material. So we're looking for some new solutions in the design world. And one of these is represented here. This is a 8-story high-rise building in London where there's no concrete or steel used at all. Next. It's made completely out of wood. The walls are all load-bearing, solid wood walls for 8 stories made of cross-ply timber. This was done in order to reach the UK's standards of carbon neutrality that they put in place for public housing. The problem with that solution is that if everyone built like that, there would be no forests left, sustainably managed or not. This project brings up another issue, and I think it's an interesting one. What about the life cycle of buildings? What happens to them after 40 years? Can you take a building apart rather than destroy it? So this building was built with no wet processes. This is all fasteners. The building becomes just a new way to store materials, and at end of life can be taken apart and those materials reused in similar ways, or it can be added to or expand or taken away from depending on changing in program. Next. So for my own research, I thought, well, why don't I combine those two? In the previous slide, you'll notice that there was it was all high embodied energy materials, metals and glass, and the slide before that was working with the renewability of wood. How about making a system that is designed for disassembly that's made of wood? So I came up with this, what I call the Triaconta system. It's with a very small number of components. You can make a very large variety of building configurations. Next. Now, I was working with local hardwoods when I was initially doing my research, and I was about ready to start on a real-world prototype. But then this happened in Haiti, where thousands of people died and were injured because of failures in building systems, typically cementitious. Next. So I thought, well, there must be, I need to find a new way to make buildings to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And so I turned to trying to find a solution using renewable resources and something that would be resilient to seismic activity and the kind of climatic conditions they face. Unfortunately, Haiti has no trees. They've mostly been cut down for making charcoal, and they've sustained massive soil erosion, so it's very difficult to actually grow things there. But this was something I came across. This is guadua bamboo, the world's largest bamboo species. It's native to Colombia, but grows well in central Latin America and the Caribbean. So I came up with a design that would allow me, instead of using solid wood pieces, to use hollow bamboo pieces to make a system, next, that would actually be very easy to put together. It's all triangulated, so it's very strong, lightweight, low cost, and would work in the context of the developing world. In this case, we found a site in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, designing and building an AIDS clinic, an extension to an AIDS clinic, using this system, and it's under construction as we speak. News of this sort of development got out and someone up in Canada heard about it at a gold mining company and contacted me and asked me to go to a summit in Ghana to see if this kind of technology would be appropriate for their enterprise, which was trying to create the world's greenest gold mine, which sounds like an impossible thing, but I like a challenge, and I was up for a trip to Accra, so I went. Next. And while I was there, I had the great pleasure of meeting Rachel O'Reilly and learning about Wildlife Works. And up to this point, I'd heard of REDD, hadn't paid a lot of attention to it, heard some good things, some bad things, but this was the first time where I really learned about a holistic, integrated, regenerative effort, which was looking at all the various sectors. It was looking at the carbon issue, but it was looking at the social issues, the biodiversity issues. And to me, this was a model of what we should be doing. Next. So I didn't know much about Wildlife Works, and I went to their websites and started researching REDD and REDD+, and got very excited and invited Rachel to Cornell to talk to my students about Wildlife Works and the works they're doing there. And they became very excited and very inspired by this kind of thing. Now, Cornell has instituted its own climate action plan in order to try to reduce its environmental impacts. And because it's a land-grant institution and it's seen as a leader in in higher education, it's taken some significant strides. It has LEED Platinum buildings. It's gone off coal. It has a small portfolio of renewable energy, a lot of student-led initiatives. Next. And they put together a climate action plan, and as part of that plan, they wanted to discuss offsets because they knew they could not get back down to zero. They're working on reductions, but they know there's a limit. So they met with local community leaders and asked them about whether or not what kind of offset program would they approve of. And there was a lot of consensus that they shouldn't engage in international offsets, that they should all be local. And so they've done this in two major ways. You can see on the slide at the left, Cornell is the owner of a lot of land, and so they're trying to increase the biomass on those lands, and they're also investing in local carbon offset initiatives in the Ithaca area. Next. This is one of the more successful ones, the Finger Lakes Climate Fund, where their funds go towards energy upgrades for low-income families. But Cornell has a large global reach, and they kind of pride themselves on their global citizenry, and they're encouraging students to go out and engage with the world, not just New York State, but everywhere. Next. So here's a small sampling of the breadth and the diversity in these various research programs, and they're all over the world. And when you look at these programs and you think nobody's talked about, we talk about international outreach here, but why is there such resistance to international credit offsets? Next. But actually, if you look on the right-hand part of the slide, it does say that there would be support for offsetting actions around the world. And so this has given me a kernel of hope, and I've been meeting with Cornell officials so that we can actually start making carbon offsetting a legitimate expense as part of our research efforts, so that now maybe the institution isn't quite ready to buy into it directly, but they will support individual researchers. And I'm a fellow at a new Institute of Engaged Learning and Research, and I think this would be a kind of strategic point in which we can start this kind of dialogue. Cornell would be the first university to engage in a REDD+ program with Wildlife Works, and it'd be very exciting. Now, I put this slide up because this was from Apollo 8 when they first zoomed around the moon, and it was the shot that really shook the world. Here you have a desolate landscape in the foreground, you have the blue planet in the background in the darkness of empty space, and you realize that we are all alone on this place. We kind of lose sight of that fact. And we realize that this is really the only shot we have. So this kind of shot in '68 started to galvanize people, got the environmental movement going. It started what we talk about today on Earth Day. And from Earth, next, we are now able to look down and see some of the impacts we're having. If you look carefully, you can see little glints of orange. Those are slash and burn fires in Borneo and Sumatra, and all the pollution associated with that. Of course, all the carbon. But from space, it all looks the same, but there's different things going on, and this is an alternative. This is the kind of activity that we could not only protect, but through programs like REDD+, we can actually bring back and engender. Thank you very much.